Tell me, does it speak? The question came from a man in a coat the color of midnight, and he asked it the way a child asks whether a statue in a museum can blink. He was not speaking to me. He was speaking about me, 3 feet from my face, to a circle of glittering guests who had drifted toward the doors of the mirror gallery the way moths drift toward anything that shines. I stood my post. I did not turn my head. I did not let my eyes drop from the line I had fixed them on, the far corner of the gilded ceiling, where 2 cherubs held up a painted sky that had not changed in 200 years. "I am told it does not," answered a woman at his elbow, and she laughed, a bright, practiced sound. "I am told they hire them for the shoulders and the silence. A handsome bit of furniture for the doorway, like a clock that cannot tell time but looks well on the mantel." The man in the midnight coat leaned a little closer. I could smell the wine on him, and beneath it something colder, the particular confidence of a person who has never once in his life been told no by anyone who could enforce it. He lifted one gloved finger and tapped, very lightly, the row of ribbons on my chest. Tap, tap. The brass and the colored silk that I had not put there for decoration, though he could not have known that and would not have cared. "Look at all these little medals," he said. "Do you suppose they gave him one for standing, one for not falling over, one, perhaps, for keeping his buttons bright?" The circle laughed again, louder this time. "It is the cleverest thing the palace does, you know. They dress up a tall fellow, they hand him a rifle he will never fire, and they set him in the doorway so the rest of us feel safe. An ornament. A very expensive ornament, but an ornament all the same." I was 41 years old that night. I had stood the door of the mirror gallery at Harrowgate Palace for 2 years and 7 months, and in that time I had been called a great many things by a great many guests, most of whom forgot me before they reached the bottom of the grand staircase. I had learned the great secret of the post, which is that stillness is not the absence of action. It is action held at full draw, a bowstring pulled and never released, hour upon hour, until the holding itself becomes a kind of work that would break most men inside a week. So I did not move when he tapped my medals. I had held heavier things than the gaze of a man in a midnight coat. But I will tell you the truth, because this is a true telling and there is no use in dressing it up. A part of me, a small and disciplined part that I keep on a very short leash, wished he knew where those ribbons came from. Wished he could see, for 1/2 of 1 second, the country where I had earned the 3rd one in the row, the cold gray ribbon with the single thread of red through it, and what I had done to be alive to wear it. Wished he understood that the rifle on my shoulder was not for show, and that the stillness he mistook for emptiness was the most dangerous thing in that bright and brittle room. He did not know, they never did, and that, I had long ago decided, was exactly as it should be. A guard who must announce himself is a guard who has already failed. The whole art of the thing is to be the door that no one tries, to be so plainly capable that no test is ever offered, or, when the world will not grant you that mercy, to be so quietly ready that when the test comes you are the only one in the room who is not surprised. My name is Corwin Vale. For 11 years before I ever wore the red wool of the Queen's household, I served in a regiment whose name was not printed in any program and whose work was not shown to any guest. We were called, among ourselves and nowhere else, the Greywater Long Watch, the men sent to stand in the dark places of the realm where the ordinary order had failed, and to hold those places until they could be made safe, and to come home, when we could, and say nothing. I had stood watches in mountain passes where the cold could stop a heart in 20 minutes. I had walked into a collapsed mine to bring out men given up for lost, and walked out carrying one of them across both shoulders. I had, once, in a border town gone bad, talked a frightened man holding 40 hostages into laying down what he held, with nothing but my voice and the slow certainty of my hands, because a louder man would have cost lives. I do not say these things to boast. I say them because you must understand what was standing in that doorway while a man tapped my medals and called me an ornament, so that when the night turned, and it did turn, harder than any night I had known in years. You will understand why I was not afraid. The man's name, I would learn before the evening ended, was Lord Havard Tremming. He had come to Harrowgate that night as a guest of the autumn gala, the great annual gathering the Crown hosted to honor the realm's patrons of the arts and sciences, and he had come, I gathered, because his family's name was old, and his temper was short, and someone had decided it was safer to invite him than to leave him off the list and listen to him complain. He moved through the gala the way a man moves through a house he believes he ought to own, and he had found in the silent figure at the gallery door exactly the kind of target a man like that always finds, something that could not answer, in front of an audience that would laugh. "Watch," he said now to his circle, and I felt rather than saw him reach toward the rifle on my shoulder, his gloved hand hovering near the strap as though he might lift it down and examine it like a curiosity at a fair. "I will wager any of you 10 gold sovereigns that I can make it flinch." A younger man at the edge of the group spoke up, not in defense of me, I want to be clear, but in the bored way of someone who has seen this trick before. "You will lose, Havard. They are trained for it." You could light a fire under his boots, and he would only stand there and let it warm his feet. "Trained," Lord Tremming repeated, and there was something in the way he said it, a curl of contempt, that told me he had decided, somewhere in his whine and his certainty, that training was a thing done to lesser men. That discipline was for people who had no choice but to obey. A dog is trained. I am not impressed by a thing that has been trained to hold still. I am impressed by a man who can do something. His hand drifted closer to my strap. "And I will tell you all with confidence that this one could not do anything at all if it came to it. Look at him. The first sign of real trouble and he would drop that pretty rifle and run. They always do, the ornaments. They are very brave with the doors and very cowardly with everything else." I let my eyes stay on the cherubs. I let my breathing stay slow. But I had marked, somewhere in the long, quiet machinery of my attention, 3 things that Lord Tremming had not, because Lord Tremming was busy performing for a circle, and I was busy doing my work. The first was that the gala was running late. The honored guests had been meant to move from the mirror gallery into the grand saloon for the Queen's address at 9, and it was past 9 now, and the doors to the saloon had not opened. That was not, by itself, alarming. But it was a deviation, and deviations are the small stones that warn you the road ahead has shifted. The second was that one of the side service doors, the narrow one set into the paneling near the orchestra, the one the staff used to carry trays, had opened twice in the last 10 minutes and shut both times without anyone coming through with a tray. A man had looked out both times and looked back in. I did not know that man's face. The third was that across the gallery, at the great doors that led to the state vestibule, my fellow guardsman Edrin Foss, a good man, 26, 3 years on the household, steady but young, had shifted his weight in a way that Edrin did not shift his weight. A small thing. The kind of thing you would not notice unless you had stood 1,000 watches and learned that a man's body tells the truth before his face has decided to. Edrin had seen something. And Edrin was trying very hard and not quite succeeding to look as though he had not. So while Lord Havard Tremming entertained his circle with the comedy of the ornament who could not be made to flinch, I was no longer entirely in the doorway of the mirror gallery. Part of me was already moving through the geometry of the room, the exits, the columns, the distance from the orchestra door to the dais, the number of guests between the side passages and the place where, at any moment, Queen Saralind of the royal house of Harrowgate would walk out to speak to her court, with her husband Prince Consort Aldrich at her side, and very possibly, her children near enough to be in a line of fire I could already feel taking shape in the dark behind the paneling. "You see," Lord Tremming said, stepping back at last with a flourish, having failed to make me flinch in choosing in the way of his kind to declare the failure a victory. "Nothing, not a tremor. There is no man in there at all, just the uniform and the wool and the polish. The Crown could replace him with a very good wax figure and not one of us would know the difference. I have proven it." He turned to his circle, spreading his hands. An ornament, as I said. He could not have known how soon he would learn otherwise. I almost pitied him for it. Because the thing about a man who calls a sword an ornament is that he learns the difference only when it is drawn, and by then it is far too late to take the word back. The orchestra finished a movement. In the small silence before the next, I heard, very faintly, beneath the rustle of silk and the murmur of 200 well-bred voices, a sound that did not belong in the mirror gallery of Harrowgate Palace. It was the sound of a bolt being drawn back, metal on metal, soft, deliberate, close. The sound a man makes when he is readying a thing that is not a curiosity at a fair, and not a rifle for show, and not an ornament at all. I turned my head. For the first time in 2 hours and 40 minutes, the ornament moved. And the night, which had been merely cruel, became something else entirely. There is a thing that happens to a man who has trained for danger long enough, and it is not what people imagine. People imagine the trained man becomes faster, louder, harder, that he snaps into a kind of fury. The truth is the opposite. The trained man becomes slower inside, even as the world around him speeds up. Time stretches. The noise of the room recedes to a far shore. Your own heartbeat, which you would expect to race, settles instead into a long, deliberate rhythm, because some old part of your body has decided that this is the moment everything before it was practiced for. So when I turned my head toward that soft metal sound, I did not lunge. I did not shout. I let my eyes travel without haste across the room, and I read it the way I would read a map of ground I was about to cross, and what I read I did not like at all. The service door near the orchestra was open again, and this time a man had come through it, and he was not carrying a tray. He wore the black and silver livery of the palace catering staff, the same as 40 other men in the room, which was the clever part. He had dressed himself in the one costume that could move anywhere in that gala without a single eye stopping on him. But the livery was wrong in 2 small ways that only someone who had spent a career learning to see wrong things would catch. The cuffs were the cuffs of last season's pattern. The household had changed the braid in the spring, and his sleeves still wore the old. And the man filled the coat differently than a waiter fills a coat, across the shoulders and the back, where a man carries the weight of a thing he has slung beneath the cloth. He was not alone. As I watched, a second figure in the same livery detached from the shadow of a marble column on the far side, and a third drifted up from near the cloakroom arch, and the 3 of them, without ever once looking at one another, were arranging themselves in a triangle whose 3 points enclosed the center of the gallery, the dais, the lectern, the place where the queen would stand. I have walked into rooms set up exactly like that before. I knew what I was looking at the way you know a face you have not seen in years. This was not a robbery. Robbers do not triangulate a room before the prize has arrived. This was a containment, 3 men positioning themselves to seal a space and command the people inside it the moment the most important person in the realm walked into the middle of it. And the soft sound of the bolt told me at least one of them was armed with more than a knife. My mind, in the long, slow second I had given it, did the arithmetic. 200 guests. 2 royal children somewhere in the building, perhaps already being brought down for the address as was the custom, to stand a moment beside their mother before being taken back upstairs. 6 household guards in or near the gallery, of whom 4 were ceremonial men with little more training than the polish of their boots, and 2, Edrin and myself, who were something more. 3 intruders, armed, positioned, patient, and clearly briefed. And a court that did not yet know any of it, that was still laughing at a small joke about an ornament who could not be made to flinch. The arithmetic did not favor us, but arithmetic is not the whole of a fight, and the men who set up that triangle had made one error in their sums that I intended to make them regret. They had counted the ornament as a 0. They had looked at the tall fellow in the red wool by the gallery door, the one the guests laughed at, and they had decided, as Lord Tremaine had decided, as the whole bright room had decided that he was furniture, a fixed obstacle of no consequence, a clock that could not tell time. They had not counted the Greywater long watch. They had not counted 11 years in the dark places. They had counted a wax figure that a very good one would not be missed for. I let them keep that count. It was the only advantage I had, and a man does not throw away his only advantage to satisfy his pride. I moved, but I moved like a guard adjusting his post, a slow, formal half-turn, the kind any of those 4 ornamental men might make to ease a stiffening back. Lord Tremaine, still basking in his triumph, took it as proof. "There," he crowed, delighted. "It does move after all. I have made it twitch. Pay up, the lot of you." I gave him nothing. I used the turn to put myself one long step closer to the line between the orchestra door and the dais, and to bring Edrin Foss into the edge of my vision, and I did the thing we had drilled 100 times in the quiet hours when no guests were watching. The thing the household teaches its serious men precisely, so that on a night like this they will not need to shout across a crowded room. I let my left hand fall to my side, fingers loose, and I tapped my thumb twice against the seam of my trousers, then closed my fist. 2 taps and a close. In the language we did not speak aloud, it meant, "I see it." "Hold, do not draw." Across the gallery, Edrin's jaw tightened. His own left hand drifted to his side and answered, 1 tap, a pause, 1 tap. "I see it too. I am with you." It is a strange comfort, in a moment like that, to learn you are not alone in the seeing. The room was full of 200 people, and not one of them knew the floor had tilted beneath them, except the 2 men in red wool at the 2 ends of the gallery, who had spent their lives learning to know. There was no time to reach a captain. Captain Brennan Hale, who commanded the household watch, and who would have been the right man to put this in the hands of, was stationed that night in the state vestibule beyond the great doors, on the far side of 200 guests and 3 positioned intruders. To go for him was to cross the triangle, raise an alarm, and trigger whatever it was these men had come to do, before I had taken a single one of them off the board. To send, Edrin was the same. We had between us perhaps 90 seconds before the doors to the grand saloon opened, and Queen Saralind walked out into the center of the most dangerous geometry in the kingdom. 90 seconds and an ornament, and a young man 3 years on the household, against 3 briefed and armed men in stolen coats. I have been in worse, not often, but I have. The first thing I needed was to know which of the 3 was the leader, because in a thing like this the leader is the clock, and if you can stop the clock you can buy back time you did not think you had. I let my eyes move among them, slow, idle, the wandering gaze of a bored man. The one by the orchestra door was young, and his hands would not stay still. He kept touching the front of his coat, the tell of a man new to the work and frightened of the thing he carried. Not the leader. The one by the cloakroom arch was older, heavier, and his eyes were doing the same work mine were, sweeping the room, counting exits. A professional, but a soldier's professional, a man who takes orders well. Not the leader either. The leader, I found at last, was the one who had come last and stood nearest the column, an unremarkable man of middle height, with a face you would forget the instant you looked away, which is the most dangerous kind of face there is. He alone was not watching the room. He was watching the doors to the grand saloon. He was watching the clock the same as I was, waiting for the same thing, and the small private stillness of him told me he was the one the other 2 would look to when it began. Forgettable face. He was my problem. The other 2 were problems I would have to solve fast and quietly so that I could give him my full attention, because a man like that, undisturbed, would do more harm in 10 seconds than the other 2 would do in a minute. And then, into the middle of my careful, silent arithmetic, Lord Havard Tremaine, bored now that the ornament had given him nothing more to play with, and looking for a fresh amusement, did the single most dangerous thing any person in that room could have done. He decided to make a scene. "You know what would be amusing," he announced to his circle, his voice carrying in the way that wine makes a voice carry, far further than its owner intends. I shall lift down his rifle. I shall hold the ornament's little gun, and we shall all have a portrait made, the guest who disarmed the king's guard. Ha! Imagine the faces at the club. And he turned, grinning, and reached both gloved hands up toward the rifle on my shoulder, in full view of the room, in full view of 3 armed men who had come to keep that room quiet, and were now watching a drunk lord blunder toward the one object in the gallery that could ruin everything. I saw Forgettable Face turn his head. I saw the young one by the orchestra door go rigid. I saw the whole fragile clockwork of the thing, their patience, their timing, their plan to wait for the queen begin to come apart, because the one variable no plan ever accounts for is a fool, and a fool was about to put his hands on a soldier's weapon in a room that had 90 seconds left before it became a battlefield. I had a half-second to decide, and in that half-second, every one of the 11 years in the dark places, every cold watch and every long draw of the bowstring gathered itself in me and chose. I let him take it. Not freely, not the way it looked. To the room, to Lord Tremaine, to his laughing circle, to anyone watching for the comedy, it looked as though the foolish lord had at last won his game, had reached up and lifted the rifle from the unresisting ornament's shoulder, and the ornament had let him, because the ornament was, after all, only furniture and could do nothing else. I saw Tremaine's grin widen as his gloved hands closed on the weapon, and the strap came free. I heard a gasp and a titter from the circle. I felt the weight leave my shoulder. But here is what no one in that room saw, because it happened in the space of a single breath, and was done with the small economy of a man who has practiced the motion 10,000 times. As the rifle left my shoulder, my right hand traveled with it, low and unhurried, and in the instant of the handoff, I removed from the weapon the small steel pin that a soldier learns to find blind, and I closed my fingers around it. And the rifle that Lord Havard Tremaine now held aloft in triumph for his portrait was, from that breath onward, a handsome and entirely harmless length of wood and steel. He had not disarmed the king's guard. The king's guard had disarmed the rifle in his hands, and let him keep the shell of it as a toy. I did this for one reason. In the next 60 seconds, that weapon was going to change hands again. I was as sure of it as I have ever been sure of anything, and when it did, I did not intend for it to be of any use to the man who took it. A drunk lord waving an empty rifle is a nuisance. A drunk lord waving an empty rifle is also, I had decided in my half-second, a gift, because 3 armed men watching a fool flourish a soldier's weapon in the middle of a crowded gala will, for 1 or 2 precious seconds, look at the fool and not at the room, and 1 or 2 seconds was the whole of my fortune. Behold, Lord Tremaine bellowed, lifting the rifle over his head, the terrible king's guard, disarmed by a man with no weapon but his charm. Forgettable Face moved. He did not run. Men like that never run. He simply began to walk with great economy toward the dais, and I understood, in the cold, clear way you understand things when time has stretched long, that the fool with the rifle had forced his hand. The intruders had meant to wait for the queen. But a scene was building in the gallery, a drunk man was waving a gun, and a scene meant that very soon someone sober would call for the watch, and the watch arriving early would ruin everything. So Forgettable Face had made the same calculation I had from the other side of it. The timing was broken, the room was about to wake, and if they were going to take the gallery they had to take it now, before the queen, with whatever hostages the room contained, and use those hostages to draw her out on their terms. He reached inside his stolen coat. And I left my post. I want to set down plainly what that meant, because the men and women who laughed at me that night did not understand it. A king's guard does not leave his post. It is the first thing they teach you and the last thing they trust you with. The post is the promise that here, at this door, this line, there will always be a man, and the man will not move, and because he will not move the people behind him may live without fear. I had held that promise for 2 years and 7 months, and I had held harder promises before it. To break it is the gravest thing a guard can do. But there is a thing they teach you only after you have proven you understand the first. The post is not the door. The post is the duty. The door is only where the duty usually stands. And on the night the duty must move to keep its promise, the man who clings to the door has mistaken the symbol for the thing, and failed the very people the door was meant to protect. I had not spent 11 years in the Greywater Long Watch to make that mistake. The duty that night was not at the gallery door. It was walking toward the dais inside a stolen coat with its hand reaching for a weapon, and I went to meet it. I crossed the floor. I did not cross it as a guard crosses a floor. I crossed it as a man crosses ground he means to own, low and fast and silent, and the room, still watching Lord Tremaine and his rifle, did not see me come. I reached Forgettable Face from his blind quarter, the side a man does not guard because he is focused forward, and I did not strike him, because a strike in a crowded room invites 100 screaming witnesses and turns a quiet thing loud. I did something quieter. I put my hand over the hand that was reaching inside his coat, and I closed it gently, the way you close a child's hand over something hot before they can lift it. And I leaned in close to his forgettable ear, and I said, very softly, in a voice he could feel more than hear, "Whatever you are reaching for, it does not come out. You and I are going to walk to that wall together, and you are going to be very calm, and no one in this room is going to die tonight, least of all you. Do you understand me?" He went rigid. I felt the strength gather in him, the professional's instinct to twist and break free, and I let him feel, through the iron of my grip, exactly how that would go for him if he tried it. I had 30 pounds and a great deal of practice on him, and my hand was over the only weapon he could reach, and the angle was mine. A lesser-trained man would have fought anyway, out of fear. Forgettable Face was not a lesser-trained man. He understood the arithmetic of a closed hand on a trapped wrist as well as I did. He went still. But he was the leader, and a leader does not surrender a room because one of his points has been taken. He turned his head slow, and he looked across the gallery to the older man by the cloakroom arch, the soldier's professional, the one who took orders well, and he gave him a single small nod that was not surrender at all. It was the signal to begin. The older man's hand came out of his coat, and this time there was no ambiguity, no question of curiosities or ornaments. The thing in his hand was black and short and unmistakable, and he raised it not toward me but toward the ceiling, and he fired one round into the painted sky where the 2 cherubs held up 200 years of peace. The piece ended with a plaster. The shot in that gilded room was the loudest thing I have ever heard, louder than any shot in any of the dark places, because it was so terribly wrong, a gunshot among the chandeliers and the silk, where no gun was ever meant to speak. The sound slapped off the marble and the mirrors and came back doubled, and the room, which had been laughing 1/2 second before, broke. 200 people screamed at once. Glass somewhere shattered. The orchestra's instruments died in a tangle of wrong notes. Bodies surged in every direction, toward the doors, away from the doors, into one another. And Lord Havard Tremaine, the man with the rifle, the conqueror of the ornament, dropped the weapon as though it had turned to fire in his hands and fell to his knees on the parquet with both arms over his head, screaming in a voice I had not heard from him all evening, a voice with nothing in it but terror. "DOWN!" The older man roared over the chaos, sweeping the black thing in his hand across the panicking crowd. "Everyone down, or the next one is not the ceiling." And in the middle of it all, with one hand still locked around the wrist of the leader of 3 armed men, in a room of 200 screaming guests, with a gala turned in a single breath into a hostage's nightmare, the ornament, the furniture, the clock that could not tell time, stood very still and very calm, and began, at last, to do the work I had been hired to do, and trained for long before that, and had carried in silence through every laugh and every tapped metal of that long and brittle night. The night had asked its question, now it would have its answer. The first rule of a room gone bad is that panic kills more people than weapons do. A crowd in flight will trample its own to reach a door, and 3 armed men do not need to fire a shot if 200 terrified guests will do the dying for them in the crush. So my first work was not the men with weapons. It was the panic. And panic, I have learned, is answered not with another loud thing but with one calm, certain voice that gives frightened people something to do, because a frightened person given a clear instruction will seize it like a drowning man seizes a rope. I did not let go of forgettable face. I turned him instead so that his body was between me and the older man's weapon. Not as a shield, I had no intention of letting harm come to even him, but as a thing the gunman would not fire toward without risking his own leader. And then I spoke, and I made my voice carry the way I had been taught to make a voice carry across a battlefield, not by shouting but by pitching it low and level and absolutely without fear, so that it cut beneath the screaming the way a keel cuts water. Still, I said, just the one word first, enormous and calm. Everyone be still. You are not in a fire, there is no fire. Lower yourselves to the floor where you stand. Do not run. Lower yourselves down and you will be safe. It is a strange thing about a calm voice in a terrified room. It spreads. The nearest guests heard me, and the simple animal relief of being told what to do reached them faster than their own panic could, and they sank to the floor, and the ones behind them followed, and the surge toward the doors faltered and broke and settled, like a wave that has spent itself on a beach. Within 10 seconds, 10 of the longest seconds I have known, 200 people were on the parquet of the mirror gallery, and the gallery was, for the first time since the shot, quiet enough to think in. The older gunman did not like it. He had wanted them up and screaming and stampeding, because a panicked crowd is a crowd that does not look around and notice that there are only 3 of you. A crowd lying calm and still on the floor is a crowd that watches. I had taken something from him with that one word, and he knew it, and he swung the black weapon toward me with his face twisting. "Let him go," he said, jerking his head toward the leader in my grip. "Let him go, or I start with the woman in green." There was a woman in green near the dais, frozen on her knees, her hands pressed to her mouth. I did not look at her. To look at her was to tell him she was a lever that worked, and a man like that, once he learns a lever works, will pull it again and again. "You will not start with anyone," I said, and I kept my voice the same level calm, addressing him as though we were 2 men discussing the weather and not one man holding 200 lives against another. "Listen to me, because I am going to tell you something true and you are going to want to hear it. You came here for the Queen. The Queen is not in this room. The doors to the saloon have not opened, and they will not open now, because the household has heard your shot and the saloon is being sealed from the other side as we speak, and the Queen is already being moved away from you by men whose whole purpose in life is to move her away from men like you. Your plan is already finished. It finished the moment your sealing came down. Everything you do from this second forward only decides how it finishes for you." I did not know with certainty that the household had sealed the saloon. But I knew Captain Hale, and I knew the men on the Queen's close protection, and I knew that the only thing that protocol does better than anything else in the world is move a monarch away from a gunshot. I was betting 200 lives that the protocol had worked. But I said it as a man says a thing he knows, because a frightened gunman who believes his plan has failed is a frightened gunman who starts looking for a way out, and a man looking for a way out is far easier to manage than a man who still believes he can win. I saw the doubt land in him. His eyes flicked once to the sealed saloon doors and back to me, and the muzzle of the black weapon dipped, half an inch, the smallest surrender of certainty. And in that half-inch, Edrin Foss did exactly the right thing. I had not forgotten the 3rd man, the young one by the orchestra door, the one whose hands would not stay still. While I had held the leader and faced down the older gunman, the young one had been left to himself, and a frightened amateur left to himself in a collapsing plan is the most dangerous element on any field, because he is the one most likely to do something stupid out of pure terror. Edrin had not forgotten him either. From the far end of the gallery, moving low along the wall behind the kneeling guests, my fellow guardsman had crossed the whole length of the room unseen. Every eye in the gallery was on me and the older gunman, and he had come up on the young one's blind side exactly as I had come up on the leader's. And now, as the older man's certainty faltered, Edrin closed the last yard and took the young one's weapon hand in both of his and bore it down and away from the crowd, and clamped his other forearm across the boy's throat in the hold we both knew, the one that does not crush but only persuades, and the young man's weapon, a smaller, uglier thing, pointed harmlessly at the parquet, and then dropped from his opened fingers and slid away across the polished floor. 2 of 3. In perhaps 40 seconds, with not one guest harmed and only the one shot fired into the ceiling, 2 of the 3 were held. The older gunman saw it. He saw his young companion taken, he saw his leader pinned, and he saw that he was now one armed man alone in a room with 2 soldiers in red wool who had just, very quietly and very fast, dismantled the thing he had come to do. And he made the choice that frightened, isolated men make, which is the worst choice, the choice that turns a salvageable thing into a catastrophe. He decided to take a hostage of his own and bargain his way out. He lunged, not toward me, not toward Edrin, but toward the woman in green, his free hand reaching for her arm, and I knew with sick certainty that if his fingers closed on her, this calm and nearly finished thing would become a siege. A long, terrible night of negotiation with an armed man and a terrified woman, and no good ending in it anywhere. I let go of forgettable face. I want you to understand what that cost. The leader was the prize, the clock, the man I had spent the whole engagement controlling. To release him was to gamble that he would stay still rather than seize the half-second of freedom, and a half-second was all a man like him needed. But the woman in green had a quarter-second, no more, and the leader was pinned by his own arithmetic while the gunman was already in motion, and a soldier learns to spend the certain thing to save the uncertain one when the uncertain one is a life. So I let the leader go, and I crossed the space between me and the older gunman the way I had crossed the floor before, low and fast and silent, and I reached the woman in green a quarter-second before he did. I did not hit him. Even then, even there, I did not hit him. I have hit men in the dark places when there was nothing else to be done, and I carry every one of them, and I have learned that the highest skill is not the blow but the thing that makes the blow unnecessary. I took the wrist of his weapon hand as it passed and I turned it, not to break, only to redirect, and I used the whole of his lunge against him, the way you use a river's own current to bring a man to the bank, so that his charge toward the woman became a stumble past her, and his weapon hand was bent up and back behind him, and his own momentum drove him face first into the marble base of a column, where he folded and slid down and lay still, dazed and disarmed and done. 3 of 3. The whole of it, from the shot in the ceiling to the older man at the foot of the column, had taken under a minute and a half. And in that minute and a half, the ornament, the furniture, the wax figure, the thing that could do nothing if it came to it, had emptied a rifle in a fool's hands, controlled the leader of an armed cell, talked 200 panicking people down onto the floor, and helped take 3 weapons off 3 men without a single guest so much as bruised. I straightened. The gallery was utterly silent now, 200 faces turned up from the floor toward the man in the red wool, the same man they had been laughing at not 3 minutes before. I looked across the room and found Lord Havard Tremaine, still on his knees where he had fallen, his midnight coat askew, his face the color of the plaster dust that drifted down from the ruined ceiling, staring at me as though he had never in his life seen the thing that was standing in front of him. He had not, none of them had. But it was not over. I knew it was not over, even as the silence stretched and the relief began to move through the kneeling crowd like warmth through cold hands, Because 3 men do not bring down the ceiling of a royal gala on a plan that depends on the queen walking into the room, and then have no second move when the queen does not come. Forgettable Face was the leader, and Forgettable Face, when I had released him, had not run. I turned, already knowing what I would find, and I found him on his feet, calm again, his unremarkable face entirely composed, and in his hand a small black object that was not a weapon, that was worse than a weapon, a slim radio handset that he had drawn while I was saving the woman in green. He lifted it to his lips, and he looked at me across the silent gallery, and for the first time all night he smiled. "You think there were 3 of us," he said. "There were never only 3 of us. The men in this room were only the noise." He pressed the handset's key. "Second team, the family is unguarded, go." The bottom went out of the night. I had been wrong. Not about the gallery. I had read the gallery correctly, the triangle, the containment, the leader. But I had read it as the whole of the thing, and it was not the whole of the thing. It was the loud part. It was the magician's left hand, waving in the bright room to hold every eye while the right hand did the real and silent work somewhere else. The shot in the ceiling, the screaming crowd, the 3 men in stolen coats, all of it had been built to do exactly what it had done, to pull every guard in the palace toward the mirror gallery, to seal the queen behind her protocol, and in the doing to draw the household's attention away from the one place the household would always, instinctively, leave to protocol rather than to men. The nursery wing, where the royal children slept. Princess Malin was 8 years old, Prince Joran was 10. On a gala night they would have been brought down to stand a moment beside their mother for her address and then taken back up, but the address had not happened, the saloon had been sealed, and the protocol that sealed the saloon would have done the only sensible thing and kept the children where they were, upstairs, behind the locked doors of the nursery wing, guarded by the small standing detail that always remained there. A small detail. 2 men, perhaps 3. Enough to turn away a lost guest or a curious servant. Not enough, not nearly enough, for a second team that had been waiting, all this time in the quiet of the palace, for the noise downstairs to draw the help away and the radio to say go. The family is unguarded. Those were the words he had used, and they were a lie and not a lie. The queen was guarded. Her close protection would have her behind 3 sealed doors by now. The prince consort, I did not know where Aldrich was, but he would have his own men. But the children. The children, on a night when every spare guard in the building had been pulled toward a shot in a ballroom, were guarded by a standing detail of 2 or 3. Against a second team I had no count of and no location for, except that they were moving, now, toward 2 sleeping children, because a forgettable man in a stolen coat had pressed a key and said go. I have stood in a great many bad moments. The moment I understood there was a second team already moving toward the nursery was the worst of them, worse than the mine, worse than the border town, worse than any cold pass. Because in all those other places the danger had been in front of me, where I could reach it, and this danger was 4 floors up and a wing away, beyond 200 people and a maze of sealed doors. And the only soldier in the building who had understood the whole shape of the trap was standing at the bottom of it with no way to get to the top of it in time. Almost no way. There is a thing that happens to me in the worst moments, and I have never been able to explain it to anyone who has not lived in the dark places. The worse it gets, the colder and clearer I become. Other men's minds close down under that weight. Mine opens. It is not courage. I have been afraid every time. It is only that fear, for me, burns away everything that is not useful and leaves the mind very bright and very fast, and in that brightness, in the half-second after go, I saw the whole board at once. I saw that I could not get to the nursery, in time, by the route a man would take. I saw that the leader, Forgettable Face, knew this, that his smile was the smile of a man who has just played a card he believes cannot be beaten, who has accepted the loss of his 3 loud men, because the 3 loud men were always meant to be lost, and who believes that the only thing standing between his second team and the children is a few seconds of the household's confusion, which he has bought and paid for. I saw Edrin Foss across the room, holding the young one, his face white with the same understanding. And I saw, in the bright cold clarity, the two things I had that forgettable face did not know I had. The first was that I knew this palace the way he did not. He had studied it, the cuffs of the old livery, the timing of the gala, the geometry of the gallery. He had studied it well, but he had studied it as a stranger studies a map. I had walked every hour of it for 2 years and 7 months, the front routes and the back, the doors the guests used and the doors only the household knew, the old service stair behind the orchestra paneling that ran, narrow and dark and forgotten, straight up the spine of the palace from the ground floor to the very landing outside the nursery wing. A stair built 300 years ago to carry firewood and chamber pots, a stair no map would mark. A stair I could climb 4 floors in under 90 seconds because I had once, on a dull night, timed myself doing exactly that, out of nothing but a soldier's habit of knowing his ground. The second thing I had was that forgettable face had counted me as a 0 one time too many. He had seen me take his 3 men, and still, I could see it in his smile. He had folded me into his arithmetic as the loudroom problem, the gallery's guard, the man whose whole purpose was down here. He did not understand that the man in front of him was not the gallery's guard at all. He did not understand the Greywater long watch. He had built his entire second move on the belief that no one in this palace could reach the nursery in time, and he had built it without knowing that the ornament he had mocked could climb a forgotten stair in the dark, faster than his team could find the nursery's front door. I made my choices in the space between 2 heartbeats, and they were hard choices, the kind that a man carries afterward whether they were right or not. I would leave the gallery to Edrin. He was young, but he was good, and the gallery was, in truth, nearly 3 men down or held, 200 guests on the floor, the household surely converging by now on the sound of the shot. Edrin could hold it. He would have to. I would leave forgettable face free. This was the hard one. The leader, the prize, the man I had controlled and released and could now, perhaps, take again, I would have to leave him, because every second I spent taking him was a second the second team spent climbing toward the children, and the children were worth more than the prize. I would have to trust that a man with no weapon, no team, and a household closing in around him would be taken by someone other than me, and accept that he might not be and carry that. And I would go up the firewood stair, alone, against an enemy of unknown number, to put my body between 2 sleeping children and whatever was coming for them. Which is, when you strip away the wool and the medals and the 2 years at a door, the only thing a king's guard is actually for. I looked at Edrin and I gave him the signal we had no drill for, because no drill imagines this. I touched 2 fingers to my chest, over the 3rd ribbon, the gray one with the thread of red, and then I pointed 2 floors, 4 floors up, and I closed my fist. He understood. Of course he understood. He gave me the smallest nod a man can give, the nod that says go. I have this. And beneath the white fear in his young face there was something I have seen only in good men in bad places, which is the resolve to hold a thing alone because someone must. I turned to forgettable face. I had perhaps 1 sentence to spare, and I spent it well. You counted me as nothing, I said. It is the last mistake you will make tonight. And then I was moving not toward him, not toward the great doors, but toward the orchestra paneling and the narrow forgotten door behind it, and I heard him understand, too late, what I had seen. I heard the smile go out of his voice as he shouted to no one and everyone, "Stop him, stop him." And I heard, beneath it, the sound that told me the household had finally arrived, the great doors of the gallery crashing open and Captain Brennan Hale's voice roaring orders, and a dozen pairs of boots coming through onto the parquet at a run. Edrin had the gallery, the household had the room, and I had a forgotten stair and 4 floors and 90 seconds to climb between 2 children and the dark. I hit the service door at a dead run, wrenched it open onto blackness, and began to climb. The firewood stair was a thing out of an older palace, a stone spiral so narrow my shoulders brushed both walls, the steps worn into shallow dishes by 3 centuries of servants' feet. There was no light. I did not want light. Light in a stairwell is a thing that arrives before you do and announces you to whatever waits at the top. I climbed by the touch of the wall under my left hand and the memory in my legs, taking the steps 2 and 3 at a time, my breath loud in the stone throat of the stair, the metals on my chest. The metals Lord Tremaine had tapped and laughed at pressing cold against my skin under the wool. I have heard people say that a man's life passes before his eyes in moments like that. Mine did not. What passed before me as I climbed was not my life but my training, the long, unglamorous years of it, surfacing now exactly when it was needed the way water rises in a dug well. The instructor at the Long Watch Depot who had made us run the stairs of the old fort in full kit, until we could do it in the dark without thinking, because, he said, the day you need to climb stairs in the dark, you will not have time to learn how. The 100 drills of clearing a room with a sleeping innocent in it, where the whole difficulty is that you must be both faster than the threat and gentler than the threat, that you must end a danger without waking a child, that the measure of the work is a sleeping face that never knew the night had teeth. I had not known, those years ago, that I was training for a spiral stair in a palace and 2 royal children I had sworn to a queen to protect. But that is the secret of all real training. You do not know what it is for until the night it is for something, and then you find it has been for exactly this all along. 40 steps, 60. The 3rd floor landing came and went, a sliver of light under a far door, and I did not slow. 80 steps. My legs were burning and my breath was a furnace, and I made myself climb faster, because somewhere on the other side of the palace, a second team was moving toward a door I had to reach first, and there are no points for a guard who arrives second. I reached the top. The firewood stair ended, as I knew it would, in a low door of old oak set into the paneling of the upper gallery, the long, quiet corridor that ran past the schoolroom and the day nursery to the children's rooms at the wing's end. I stopped at that door with my hand on the iron latch, and I made myself do the hardest thing of the whole climb, which was to wait. 2 seconds. 3. Long enough to let my furnace breath slow to silence, because a man who bursts through a door gasping has given away the one thing that might save him and the children both, which is the chance to see before being seen. I pressed my ear to the oak. And I heard them. Footsteps in the corridor beyond, soft, controlled, the footsteps of men who knew their work, moving in the careful spacing of a team that has cleared rooms before. Low voices, 2 of them, then a third answering from further off. And under the voices, faint and terrible, a small sound that put a cold hand around my heart. The sound of the standing detail's failure. A man's groan, somewhere on the floor of that corridor, where one of the children's guards lay hurt. So the second team had already reached the wing. They had already passed the outer detail. They were in the corridor between me and the children's doors, and I was behind them, in the one place they had not thought to watch, because no one watches the firewood stair. I will not pretend I knew in that moment how many they were. I had counted 3 voices, but voices are a poor count. There might be 4 or 5. I had 1 rifle's worth of skill and no rifle. I had emptied my own into a fool's hands and left it on the gallery floor. I had for a weapon my 2 hands and the cold, bright clarity and 3 centuries of forgotten stare at my back. It was not enough. By any honest arithmetic, it was not enough. But arithmetic is not the whole of a fight. I have said that before, and I had spent my whole life proving it, and I was not going to stop proving it 3 feet from 2 sleeping children. The men in that corridor had 2 great weaknesses, and a man who is outnumbered must fight from his enemy's weaknesses or not fight at all. The first weakness was that they did not know I was there. The second was that they could not, would not fire freely. Not in a corridor full of locked doors behind which were the very children they had come to take. For a team sent to seize is a team that cannot afford a stray round through a nursery door, which meant that of the two of us, they were the ones fighting with one hand tied, and I was the one with nothing to lose but a life I had already in the climb decided to spend. So I did not burst through the door. I opened it the width of a hand in the dark without a sound. 3 years of palace doors had taught me which of them whispered and which of them screamed, and this one I had oiled myself one slow afternoon out of nothing but a guard's habit of tending his ground, and I looked. The corridor was dim, lit only by the low night lamps the household left burning for the children. 3 men. I had counted true. 3 men in dark clothes, not livery now. They had shed the disguise up here where no guests would see them, moving in a line toward the door at the corridor's end that I knew was Prince Joran's, with Princess Malin's beside it. One of the standing detail lay against the wainscot, moving feebly, alive, hurt. The 3 intruders had their backs 3/4 to me. The nearest was 6 feet away. The farthest, at the children's door, was already reaching for the handle. 6 feet. There are men who would tell you that one man cannot take 3 from behind in a corridor, and on most nights they would be right. But I was not most men, and this was not most nights, and the whole of the Greywater Long Watch had been built for exactly the moment when a man must do the thing that cannot be done, because the alternative is unthinkable. I had a half-second of surprise, a narrow corridor that would not let all 3 turn on me at once, and an enemy who could not fire toward the children's doors. It was, I judged, enough. It would have to be enough. I went through the door. I took the nearest man first, and I took him silently, the way the watch teaches, the arm across the throat and the turn that puts a man down without a sound and without lasting harm, and I had him on the floor and breathless before the second man had fully understood that the dark behind them had a man in it. The second turned, and his hand went for the weapon at his belt, and I did not let it arrive. I closed the distance and trapped the hand and used him, as I had used the gunman in the gallery. His own turning weight carried past me and into the wall, and he struck it and folded. 2 of 3 in under 4 seconds in near silence, with the children's doors still shut, and behind them, I prayed, 2 children still asleep. But the third man, the one at the door, the one already reaching for the handle of Prince Joran's room, the third man was faster and harder than the other 2, and he had the half-second now that I had spent on the first pair, and he turned with the weapon already in his hand, and he did the thing his training told him to do and his orders forbade. He raised it toward me, and his finger was inside the guard, and behind me there were no children but in front of him. Past my shoulder there were, and I saw the war in him, the half-instant of hesitation as the soldier's reflex to fire collided with the order not to fire toward the nursery wall. That half-instant of hesitation was the gift the children's doors gave me, the enemy's weakness made flesh, and I did not waste it. I have never moved faster in my life. I crossed the last of the distance before the war in him was decided, and I took the weapon, not his hand, the weapon itself, my palm over the top of it, bearing the muzzle down and away toward the floor where a discharge would harm no one. And with my other hand I struck once, the single blow of the whole night, open-handed and precise, to the hinge of his jaw, the blow that ends a thing cleanly, and he went down at the foot of Prince Joran's door, and the weapon came away in my hand, and the corridor was at last still. 3 of 3. The second team finished, in a dim corridor in under 15 seconds, with 3 weapons taken and 3 men down and not one round fired, and I stood frozen, listening, my heart enormous in my chest behind the 2 doors at the corridor's end, not a sound. Not a cry, not a footstep, not a child's frightened voice. They had not woken. The whole of it had passed 3 feet from their sleep and had not so much as troubled it. That more than the medals, more than the gallery, more than anything I had ever done in any dark place, was the work. A sleeping face that never knew the night had teeth. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of Prince Joran's door for 1 second, just one, and let myself feel it, the thing I had not let myself feel in the climb, the simple, shaking enormity of having been in time. Then I straightened, because it was not over even now. I gathered the three men's weapons. I knelt beside the hurt member of the standing detail and found him conscious, a young guard named Pell with a gash above his ear and a great deal of fear in his eyes, and I told him in the calm voice that the children were safe and the men were down and the worst was past, and I watched the words steady him. And I went to the wall panel where I knew the household's inner alarm was set, 3 years of walking the ground, every hour of it paying out now, and I struck it. And somewhere far below, deep in the bones of Harrowgate Palace, a bell began to ring that would bring Captain Hale and every able man in the building up the proper stairs to this corridor at a run. I had reached the children first, I had held the door, I had kept the promise. But as the bell rang and Pell breathed easier and the three men lay still at my feet, a cold thought rose through the heat of it all, and it was this. A second team meant a plan deeper than I had read, and a man who plans 2 teams plans for the failure of both. Forgettable Face had said the men in the gallery were only the noise. What then had been the silence? I did not yet know, but I knew the night was not done with its question, and that the worst answer might still be coming. Captain Brennan Hale came up the proper stairs at the head of a dozen men, and the corridor that had been mine alone filled in seconds with red wool and drawn weapons and shouted clearances. Hale was a square, gray, careful man of 50 who had spent his whole life in the household and had never, I think, fired a weapon in anger, and who was, for all that, exactly the right man to command the watch, because the watch's work, 99 nights in 100, is not war but vigilance, and Hale was the most vigilant man I ever served under. He took in the corridor in a single sweep. The 3 men down, the weapons stacked, Pell upright and bandaged against the wainscot, and me, standing at the children's door in a tunic gray with plaster dust, and a stranger's weapon hanging from my hand. "Veil," he said, and there was a great deal in the single word disbelief and dawning understanding, and something that might have been awe held very firmly in check, because Hale did not believe in awe on duty. "Report." I reported. I have given 100 reports in my life, and I gave that one the way I give all of them, flat and complete and in order, the gallery and the triangle and the disarmed rifle and the shot in the ceiling, Edrin and the 200 on the floor, the radio and the second team and the firewood stair, the 3 men in the corridor and the children unwoken behind their doors. Hale listened without a word, and at the end of it he was silent for a moment, and then he said the thing that told me he had understood not just what I had done but what it meant. "You left your post," he said. It was not an accusation. It was a man laying a fact on the table to see what it weighed. "The post was not at the door tonight, sir," I said. "It was here." He looked at me a long moment, and then he nodded once, the way Hale nodded when a thing was settled in his mind and would stay settled. "It was," he agreed. "It was here." And that was all he ever said to me about leaving my post, then or after, because Hale understood the difference between the door and the duty, which is the difference between a guard and an ornament, and which not one person who had laughed at me in the gallery had understood at all. The children were woken, gently, by the household women, and taken male and sleepy and bewildered, Joran wide-eyed and full of fierce 10-year-old questions, out by a secure route to where their mother waited, and I learned later that Queen Saralind held them both for a long time without speaking, and that the prince consort, told what had nearly happened in the corridor outside his children's rooms, had gone very white and very quiet, which is the way that men of real feeling go when feeling is too large for words, but that was later. In the corridor, in the immediate aftermath, while Hale's men secured the 3 intruders and a physician saw to Pell, I had a single quiet minute, and I spent it leaning against the wall with my eyes closed, letting the cold clarity drain out of me at last and the simple human shaking take its place, the way it always does after. It is in those minutes, the after minutes, that a man meets himself, and I will tell you what I met, because the whole point of a true telling is the truth and not the polish. I met the 11 years. I met the cold passes and the collapsed mine and the border town, and I met the reason I had left the Greywater long watch at last and taken a quiet post at a quiet door in a bright palace, which was not, as some of my old comrades had teased, that I had gone soft. It was that I had grown tired of the dark places, tired of being the man sent where the order had failed. I had wanted, after 11 years, to stand somewhere where the order had not failed, where there were children who slept safe and a queen who was good and a court that danced, and to be a small part of keeping it that way, and to be, for once in my life, unneeded, to be furniture, to be an ornament, to stand at a door so plainly safe that no one would ever test it, and to grow old there, having spent my dangerous years and earned my quiet ones. That had been the dream, and the dream had a flaw in it that the night had just exposed, the flaw in every man's hope of a quiet end, which is that the dark places do not stay where you leave them. They follow. They put on a stolen coat and walk into your bright room and tap your medals and call you furniture, and they make you choose all over again between the quiet you wanted and the duty you are. I had chosen. I had climbed the stair. I did not regret it. But leaning against that wall with my eyes closed, I grieved, a little, for the quiet old age I had wanted and would not. I understood now, ever quite have, because a man who can do what I had just done in that corridor will be asked to do it again, and again, as long as there are dark places and children who sleep, and the asking does not stop because the man is tired. That is the cost of the kind of man I am, and it is a real cost, and I will not pretend the medals make up for it. They do not. The gray ribbon with the thread of red was given to me for a thing I did in a place I cannot name, and it sits on my chest and is heavier than it looks, and on the nights when I would rather have been an ornament after all, it is heaviest of all. But there was no time for grief. There never is. Hale's voice cut through the after minute, sharp now with a new alarm. Vale, the gallery. Foss has the 3 from the floor, and we have these 3, but the leader, the man with the radio. Foss says he never took him. In the confusion of our arrival, the man was gone. The cold clarity came back into me all at once, the grief swept out by it like a tide going out. Forgettable face. I had left him free to climb the stair, gambled that the household would take him, and the household had not in the storm of the gallery, with 3 men down and 200 on the floor and Hale's men pouring through the doors. The one man who mattered most, the unremarkable man with the forgettable face and the radio, had simply walked out of the chaos he had made, because a man whose whole craft is to be unremarkable is a man no one stops in a crowd. He was loose in the palace, and he had said the men in the gallery were only the noise, and the second team, I understood now, with a falling sensation, the second team might have been noise too. A deeper noise, a more convincing one, loud enough to pull me up a stair and Hale's whole reserve into a corridor. 2 teams spent, 2 distractions, the household's entire strength now gathered in 2 places, the gallery below and the nursery wing above, and the man who had planned it all walking free through a palace emptied of guards everywhere else. Everywhere else, including, I thought, with the cold clarity going colder still, the one place a man would go if the children and the queen were both walled in by protocol and guards. The one target left undefended once the household had thrown all its strength at the noise. "Where is the prince consort?" I said. Hale looked at me. "With the queen." "The protocol." "The protocol sealed the queen and her close protection in the inner apartments," I said, already moving, already through the corridor toward the proper stair, the weapon still in my hand. "It moved the children here where we are now standing with every spare man in the building. But the prince consort, Captain, where was Aldrich when the shot was fired? Not with the queen. The queen was being moved to the gala. He was already there ahead of her, receiving the patrons. He was in the small reception room off the saloon. And when the shot came and the protocol locked the queen behind her doors and pulled the children to safety and threw the whole household at the gallery and then at this corridor, I was at the head of the stair now, looking down into it, the bell still ringing in the bones of the palace. Who went to the prince consort? The silence that answered me was the worst sound of the entire night. No one had gone to the prince consort. The protocol had no line for him in the first chaotic minute. The protocol was built around the monarch and the heirs, and Aldrich, beloved as he was neither. Every man had gone where the noise sent him. And a forgettable man with a forgettable face was loose in a palace, with one last move left, and an undefended royal alone in a small reception room. And I understood at last and all the way down what the silence behind the noise had been. It had been this, it had been from the start. Get the queen's protection to her husband, I told Hale, and I did not wait to see if he obeyed, because I was already going down the stair 3 steps at a time, the way I had come up, because once again the duty was not where the household had put its strength, and once again the only man who had read the whole shape of the trap was the man they had spent the whole night calling furniture, and once again there was no one to send but me. I went down into the palace to find the man with the forgettable face, and I prayed as I ran that for the 3rd time that night I would be in time. The small reception room off the grand saloon was called the Amber Room, for the warm gold of its old paneling, and it was where Prince Consort Aldrich had been receiving the patrons of the gala when the night came apart. I knew the route to it from the nursery wing better than any man alive, not the route the guests took, which wound through the state rooms, but the household's route, the back passages and the linen stair and the service corridor that ran behind the saloon's east wall. I took it at a run, and as I ran I made myself think, because the worst thing I could do was arrive at that door breathless and blind the way the situation tempted me to. What did I know? I knew Forgettable Face was a planner, that the whole night had been his, layered and patient, 2 teams spent like coins to buy the household's attention. I knew he was alone now, his men taken, his noise spent, with 1 move left. And I knew the most dangerous thing about him, which I had felt in the gallery when I held his wrist. He was not a fanatic. He was a professional. Fanatics are, in a terrible way, easier. They want a thing larger than their own survival, and a man who does not care to live cannot be reasoned with. But Forgettable Face wanted to live. I had seen it when I trapped his hand, the cold animal calculation, the way he went still rather than throw his life away on a hold he could not break. A man who wants to live can be reasoned with. A man who wants to live has a price, and a door, and a way out he is steering toward, and if you can find that door before he reaches it, you can close it. But why the Prince Consort? That was the piece I could not yet fit. The children, I understood. A child is the cruelest lever in the world, and a team that holds the heirs holds the realm. The queen I understood, but Aldrich, the consort, beloved but powerless, neither monarch nor heir, why spend the deepest, most patient part of the whole plan on him? I had the answer by the time I reached the linen stair, and it turned my blood to ice water, because it meant the night was not what I had thought even now. It was not an assassination. It had never been an assassination. A man does not build a plan this careful, this layered, this expensive in trained men, merely to kill. Killing is loud and quick, and does not need 2 decoy teams and a forgettable face. This was a taking. The whole architecture of the night, the gallery to seal the queen, the second team to draw the reserve, the bell I myself had rung to gather every man in the palace into 1 corridor. All of it had been built to strip one undefended royal out of the household's protection long enough for a professional to walk him quietly out a side door and into a waiting dark, and to use him alive, as the lever no queen in the world could refuse. They did not want Aldrich dead. They wanted Aldrich gone, in their hands breathing, so that Queen Saralind would do whatever they next demanded to have her husband back. It was, I am obliged to admit, a very good plan. It had only 1 flaw, and the flaw was the same flaw it had all night, and the flaw was me. The ornament they had counted as a zero, who had read the gallery, climbed the stair, and was now coming down the linen passage behind the amber room, while the planner believed every guard in the palace was 4 floors above him in a nursery corridor. I came to the service door behind the amber room's east wall, and I stopped, and I made myself once more do the hardest thing, which was to wait and listen before I moved. Through the door, muffled, I heard voices. 2 of them. One was low and level, an unhurried, forgettable face. I knew it instantly, the same calm I had heard in the gallery. The other was Prince Consort Aldrich's, and it was steadier than I would have believed. A man frightened but holding himself, the way good men do. "Will walk with me to the East Terrace," Forgettable Face was saying, "and you will be calm and you will be unhurt, and in a week your wife will have you back, and the whole of this will be a story you tell your grandchildren. Or you will not walk with me, and it will be a different kind of story and a shorter one. I would rather the first. I am, despite what your evening has suggested, a professional, and a professional prefers the clean ending. Now, the terrace." "My children," Aldrich said, and his voice broke just slightly on the word and steadied again. "Are they?" "Your children are not my concern and were never the point," said Forgettable Face with the flat honesty of a man who has no reason left to lie. "The men upstairs were never going to take them out of a palace full of guards. They were going to be caught. That was the entire purpose of them, to be caught loudly, so that every man in this building would run to catch them and leave you, sir, quite alone with me. And so they have. You are the point, sir. You always were. The terrace, if you please." I heard then the small sounds of a man being moved, a chair pushed back, a footstep, the particular quiet of a weapon held close against a captive's side. They were leaving. He was walking Aldrich toward the East Terrace doors, and beyond the East Terrace, I knew, lay the old carriage drive and the garden wall, and past the wall, 100 ways into the night that no household could close in time. If they reached the terrace, it was done. The third part of the night, the silent part, the real part, would succeed. And Queen Saralind would wake tomorrow to a ransom and a nightmare, and the realm would learn that all its guards and all its protocol had been beaten by one forgettable man who understood that the way to defeat a fortress is not to attack its strength, but to make its strength run, all at once, to the wrong place. I had perhaps 10 seconds, and I had no plan that the situation would let me make, because the one thing I could not do was burst through that door. A man holding a hostage at the point of a weapon, startled, will fire before he thinks, and the body beside him was the prince consort of the realm. The whole of my craft, everything the Greywater Long Watch had ground into me across 11 years, came down to the single hardest discipline of the entire trade, which is this: that the highest skill is not speed, and not strength, and not even surprise, but the cold judgment to know which of those to spend and which to hold, in a moment where spending the wrong one kills the very person you came to save. I did not have the angle for surprise. The service door opened to the side they were already turning toward. I did not have a clear path for speed. The room was between us. What I had was the one thing Forgettable Face had never once, all night, correctly weighed: not my speed, not my strength, but my voice, the level, unafraid voice that had talked 200 people down onto a ballroom floor, and years before had talked a desperate man in a border town into laying down what he held. He had heard that voice in the gallery. He had felt it. And the thing about a professional, the thing that separates him from a fanatic, is that a professional can be reasoned with, because a professional, at the bottom of it, is doing arithmetic, and arithmetic can be changed if you can show him a new number. So I did not go through the door fast. I went through it slow. I opened it the way I had opened the corridor door upstairs, without a sound, and I stepped through into the warm gold light of the amber room with my empty hands open and visible, and the captured weapon left behind me on the floor of the passage. And I let Forgettable Face see me, unarmed, calm, alone. And I watched his weapon swing instantly from Aldrich's side to me, and I watched his forgettable face register the impossible, that the ornament was here. 4 floors below where he had so carefully sent him, standing in the doorway of his last move with empty hands and the patience of a man who has all night. "You," he said. And for the first time in the whole of the night, I heard, in the voice of the man who had planned everything, the thin, cold edge of a plan that had just discovered it was not going to work. "Me," I agreed. "Let us do some arithmetic. You and I am rather good at it, and so, I think, are you. Put up the weapon, let the prince consort step away, and we will talk about your door because you have lost the palace, but you have not yet lost your life, and I am the one man here who can still help you keep it. I would rather the clean ending too." Forgettable Face did not lower the weapon. But he did not fire either, and the not firing was everything, because it told me that the arithmetic had already begun in him, that the professional was already running the new numbers I had handed him, and that the part of him that wanted to live had heard the offer of a door and could not quite ignore it. "There is no door," he said. "You rang the bell. The household is coming. If I let him go, I am taken. If I am taken, I hang. The arithmetic, since you are so fond of it, is that the man holds the hostage to the last, because the hostage is the only number left on his side of the ledger." He pressed the weapon a fraction closer to Aldrich, who stood very still, his eyes on me, his face the color of the amber wall. "You have come down here to be brave and unarmed and to talk me out of the only card I hold. It is a fine performance, but I am not a frightened man in a ballroom, and I do not put up my only card because a guard asks me nicely." "No," I said, "you don't. You are quite right, so I am not going to ask you nicely. I am going to tell you the truth, which is a different thing, and then you are going to do the arithmetic with the real numbers instead of the ones you walked in with." I took one slow step into the room, my hand still open, and I let him see, as I moved into the gold light, the row of ribbons on my chest, the ones Lord Tremaine had tapped, the ones his whole plan had taught him to read as decoration. "You looked at this palace, and you saw a fortress guarded by ornaments. You were nearly right. Most of the men in red wool tonight are exactly what you took them for: good men, brave men, but ceremonial men, trained to stand and salute and turn away the curious. You built your whole plan on the certainty that there was no one in this building who could do what I have done tonight. And on most nights, in most palaces, you would have been right, and you would be on the East Terrace now with your hostage and your clean ending." I took another step. The weapon stayed on Aldrich, but Forgettable Face's eyes were on me now, on the ribbons, and I saw the first thread of real doubt enter the unremarkable face. "You made one error," I said. "You did your reconnaissance, and you learned the timings and the liveries and the geometry, and you learned, I am sure, the names and the postings of the household guard. But you read me off a roster, and the roster says Corwin Vale, gallery door, 2 years and 7 months. The roster does not say where I was for the 11 years before that, because that posting does not appear on any roster you could find. It was the Greywater Long Watch. You will not have heard the name. Almost no one has. We were the men the realm sent into the places where the order had failed, the passes, the collapsed ground, the towns gone bad, the rooms where a desperate man held 40 people and a louder soldier would have gotten them killed. I stood 11 years of those watches. I have taken hostages back from harder men than you in worse rooms than this. And every one of those men made the same mistake you are making right now, which is to believe that the hostage is a card that cannot be beaten." "It cannot," he said, but the certainty had gone out of it. "It can," I said, "because the hostage is only a card so long as you can use him, and you cannot use him against me, and here is why, and this is the real arithmetic, so listen." I stopped, 6 feet away, close enough now, the distance I had been closing one slow step at a time all through the talking, the way you close a distance on a frightened animal, so gently it does not see the trap shut. "If you fire on the prince consort, you lose your card and your life in the same second, because the household arrives in the next breath, and a man who has just killed the consort does not see a courtroom. If you fire on me, you lose the half-second it takes, and in that half-second I will have your weapon, because I am 6 feet away and I have done this more times than you have years in the trade, and you have felt my hands once already tonight, and you know that I am not telling you a story. And if you do nothing, if you simply stand there holding your card and waiting, then the household arrives in its own time and takes you with the card still in your hand, and you hang anyway. Every branch of your arithmetic ends the same way but one. I held his eyes. There is one number left on your side of the ledger, and it is not the hostage, it is me. I am the only man in this realm who can tell a court that at the end, when it was lost, you chose the clean ending and harmed no one, and the difference between that testimony and its absence is the difference between a cell and a rope. I have given that testimony before, for men who earned it. I am offering to earn it with you. Put up the weapon, let him go, and live. The amber room was very quiet. Somewhere far off the bell still rang, and beneath it now, growing, was the sound I had been buying time against and counting on in equal measure: boots in the state rooms, the household converging, Hale's men closing the net at last. Forgettable Face heard it too. And I watched the whole of the night come down in his unremarkable face to the single oldest equation in the world, the one every cornered man must finally solve. The choice between the thing he wants, which is to win, and the thing he needs, which is to live. He was a professional. At the bottom of it, under all the patience and the planning and the forgettable face, he wanted to live. I had known it since the gallery, when he went still in my grip rather than spend his life on a hold he could not break. And a man who wants to live, shown clearly and calmly, and without contempt that every road but one ends in his death, will take the one road not out of goodness, not out of surrender, but out of the same cold arithmetic that had built the whole of his terrible clever night. He took it. The weapon came down from Aldrich's side. Slowly, the way a man lowers a thing he has staked everything on, he turned it in his hand and held it out to me, grip first, and he stepped back from the prince consort with his empty hands rising, and he said, in the level voice with all the planning gone out of it and only the professional left, "Your testimony, you will give it." "I will give it," I said, and I took the weapon, and I meant the promise, because a man who does not keep the promise that ends a thing without blood is a man who will not be able to end the next one. You chose the clean ending. I will say so. Now stand still and put your hands behind you, and it is over. And it was over. Prince Consort Aldrich crossed the room to me on legs that I could see were not entirely steady, and he did not embrace me, because we were both men holding ourselves together by the same thin discipline, but he put his hand on my shoulder on the red wool gray with plaster dust, and he gripped it hard, and he said, very low, "My children. The corridor upstairs. That was you as well." "It was, sir. All of it, the whole night, it was you." "There was an Edrin Foss, sir," I said, "and a young guard named Pell who took a wound at your children's door and held his post until I came, and a Captain Hale who brought the household up the proper stairs. It was not only me." "But it was you who read it," Aldrich said, and his eyes were wet now, and he did not care that they were. "3 times tonight every guard in this palace ran to the wrong place, and 3 times one man went to the right one. They will tell me it was the household that saved my family. I will know it was the man they put at a door and forgot." He looked at the ribbons on my chest, the ones the night had begun with a fool tapping in contempt, and something moved in his face. "What is that one, the gray, with the red thread?" I did not answer at once. It is not a thing I speak of. But the prince consort of the realm had stood at the point of a weapon and held himself like a man, and his children were sleeping safe 4 floors up, because of a place I could not name, and I judged that he had earned the only answer I would ever give. "It is for a room much like this one, sir," I said. "In a place the realm does not put on its maps, where a man held people he should not have held, and I was sent to bring them home. I brought them home. The realm was grateful. They gave me the gray ribbon and asked me never to say where." I straightened, and the boots were at the amber room's far doors now, Hale's voice among them. "I left that work because I was tired of dark rooms, sir. I took a quiet door in a bright palace so that I would never have to stand in such a room again." Aldrich looked at me for a long moment, understanding the whole of what I had not said. And tonight the dark room came to you anyway. It always does, sir, I said. That is the one thing they never tell you. It always does. The doors of the amber room came open, and Captain Hale was through them with 6 men, weapons up, and for one taut second the room was all motion and shouted commands. And then it resolved, the way these things do once the danger is past and only the order remains, into the careful, practiced business of taking a man into custody. Forgettable Face stood still with his hands behind him as I had told him to and made no trouble, and when one of Hale's men moved to handle him roughly, Hale himself said, sharply, gently, he surrendered to Vale without harm. Noted in the record. So even that promise began to be kept, the first installment of a testimony I would give in full when the time came, because the difference between a guard and a thug is that a guard's word holds whether the man it protects deserves it or not. They took him out. As they led him past me, he stopped, just for a moment, and he looked at me with the forgettable face that I would, in truth, remember for the rest of my life, and he said quietly, so that only I could hear, I read every roster in this household. I never found you. No, I said, you weren't meant to. How many like you are there, in palaces like this? Men a roster doesn't show. I looked at him and I told him the truth because there was no harm left in it and because I wanted him to carry it into his cell. Fewer than there should be, I said, but always one. There is always one. That is the thing your kind never learns. You count the ornaments and you are right about the ornaments and you build your clever knight on the counting and you never account for the one. There is always one. Pray where you are going that you never meet another. They led him away, and the amber room emptied of weapons and filled instead with the household's afterwork, the physicians and the stewards and the quiet, competent people who put a palace back together after a night like that. And I stood in the middle of it, suddenly and enormously tired, the cold clarity draining out of me for the last time, leaving only a man of 41 in a dusty red tunic who wanted, more than he had ever wanted anything, to sit down. I did not sit down. There was one thing left to do, and the doing of it was not strictly my duty, and I will be honest and tell you that I did it partly for myself, because even a disciplined man is a man, and there are some accounts a man is owed the settling of. I went back to the mirror gallery. The gallery, when I came back into it through the great doors this time and not the orchestra paneling, was a changed place. The 200 guests had been brought up off the floor and gathered to one end, where the household was taking their names and their accounts before letting them go out into the night. The ruined ceiling dropped its slow snow of plaster dust over everything. The orchestra's instruments lay where they had been dropped. And there, near the dais, sitting on a gilded chair with a household physician checking him over for a shock he had taken not to his body but to his certainty, was Lord Havard Tremaine. He saw me come in. The whole gallery saw me come in, the man in the dust-gray tunic, the gallery's own guard, returning, and a kind of silence moved through them. The silence of 200 people who had spent the early part of the evening watching a fool tap a guard's medals and call him furniture, and the later part of it face down on a ballroom floor while that same guard talked them through their terror and took 3 armed men off the board, and who were only now in the after-quiet, beginning to understand that they had been wrong about something in a way that would stay with them. Edrin Foss was there by the dais, and when he saw me, his face broke into something too large for a guard on duty, and he crossed to me and gripped my forearm, hard, the way soldiers grip who have held a line together and lived. "The children," he said. "Hale's runner said the nursery wing." "Safe," I said. "All of them, asleep through the worst of it. You held the gallery, Edrin. That was the line tonight, and you held it." "I held 3 men on a floor," he said. "You held the whole palace." "We held it," I said, and I meant it, because no man holds a palace alone, and any man who tells you otherwise is selling you something. Now I have one small thing to settle, and then I am going to go and sit down in a cupboard somewhere for an hour, and I would be obliged if no one looked for me. I walked the length of the gallery to where Lord Havard Tremaine sat on his gilded chair, and the whole room watched me do it, and I stopped in front of him, and I looked down at the man in the midnight coat who had begun the night by asking whether the ornament could speak. He looked up at me. The wine was long gone out of him. What was left was a man who had been, a few hours before, the most confident person in any room he entered, and who had spent the most frightening minutes of his life on his knees on a parquet floor with his arms over his head, screaming, while the furniture he had mocked saved every life in the room, including his own. There is no humbling in the world like that one. Not the humbling another man does to you, but the humbling the truth does, when it walks up in a dusty red tunic and stands in front of you, and there is nowhere left to look but at it. He opened his mouth. I think he meant to apologize, and I think the apology would have been real, because real fear burns the performance out of a man and leaves whatever is actually there. And what was actually in Lord Havard Tremaine, it turned out, was an ordinary frightened person who had spent his whole life never once being told no by anyone who could enforce it, and who had just, in a single terrible night, been told no by the whole of reality at once. I did not let him apologize, not because I wished to deny him it, but because an apology made in front of 200 staring people is a performance too, even a sincere one, and I had had enough of performances for one night. So I spoke first, quietly, so that only he and the nearest few could hear, in the level voice I had used on the gunman and the planner and now used more gently on the fool. You asked earlier whether I could speak, I said. I can. I have been speaking all night to 200 frightened people on this floor, to 3 armed men, to the one who held a weapon on the prince consort. Speaking is most of the work, it turns out. The standing is only what people see. I let that sit a moment. You asked what my medals were for. I will tell you what one of them is for. It is for going into a room where a desperate man held people he should not have, and bringing them home without a shot, with nothing but my voice and my hands and the patience to outlast him. I earned it in a place I am not allowed to name, doing the work I did again tonight in your gallery while you knelt on the floor. They are not decorations, Lord Tremaine. I did not put them on for you to tap. I straightened. But I did not come over here to shame you. You shamed yourself, and reality finished the job, and I have no quarrel left with a man who has learned what you learned tonight. I came over to tell you one thing, and then I am done, and you may go home and never think of me again, which is what I would prefer. Here it is. He waited, white-faced, and the gallery waited with him. The next time you see a man standing still at a door, I said, and you are tempted to believe that the stillness is emptiness, and that a man who does not move cannot act, and that the quiet ones are the safe ones to mock, remember this room. Remember that you were never in more danger in your life than you were tonight, and that the only thing that stood between you and that danger was the ornament. That is all. Go home, Lord Tremaine, and the next ornament you meet, leave its medals alone. You do not know what they are for, and you should be grateful every day of your life that there are men who do. I turned and walked away from him, and I did not look back, and behind me the gallery was so quiet that I could hear the plaster dust falling. I had said what I came to say. Whether it took root in him, I never knew for certain. But I heard, months later, that Lord Havard Tremaine had grown notably quieter at the clubs, and that he had taken to nodding, gravely and without a word, to the guards at the palace gates whenever he passed. And a man who nods to a guard has learned at least the beginning of the thing, and the beginning is more than most of his kind ever learn. I did not get my hour in a cupboard. Word travels through a palace faster than any runner, and before I had reached the great doors of the gallery, a steward in the Queen's own livery found me and said, in the careful voice of a man delivering a summons one does not refuse, that Her Majesty wished to see me. At once, in the inner apartments. So instead of a cupboard I was brought, dusty and aching and emptied out, through the sealed doors and the close protection, and into a small warm room where Queen Saralind of the royal house of Harrowgate stood with her 2 children, Princess Malin asleep against her side and Prince Joran awake and grave, and holding very tightly to his mother's hand, and Prince Consort Aldrich beside her with his arm around all three of them, as though he would never again in his life let any of them out of the circle of it. I had stood my post in Queen Saralind's palace for 2 years and 7 months, and I had never once been this close to her. From a distance, she was a figure of state, robed and crowned and remote. Close, in a small warm room in the small hours of the worst night of her reign, she was something simpler and far harder to stand in front of, a mother who had nearly lost her children and her husband in a single night, and who knew, now, exactly how nearly, and exactly to whom she owed that it had only been nearly. "They have told me what you did," she said. Her voice was steady, but it was the steadiness of enormous control, the same steadiness I had heard in her husband at the point of a weapon, and I understood that they were well matched, the queen and the consort, two people who held themselves together for the sake of the people who needed them too. "Captain Hale has told me. My husband has told me. I have heard it 3 times now, and each time I understand a little more of how close it was, and a little more of what one man chose to do about it." She looked at me, and her eyes went, as her husband's had, to the row of ribbons on my dusk-gray chest. "I confess I did not know what I had standing at my gallery door. I knew your name. I did not know the rest. Why did you never say?" "A guard who must announce himself, your majesty," I said, "is a guard who has already failed. The whole of the work is to be so plainly there that no one tries the door. I did not say because there was no need to say, until tonight there was, and then I did not say it either, I only did the work. The saying is for after. This is the after, and so I will say it now. I served 11 years in a regiment the realm does not name, doing the work I did tonight before I came to your door. I came to your door because I was tired of that work and wished to do a quieter kind. I did not expect the dark to follow me here. It did. And when it did, I was glad not that it came, but that when it came, it was me at the door and not a man who could not have read it. That is the only thing I am proud of tonight, your majesty, not what I did, that I was the one standing where it was needed." The queen was quiet for a moment. Then she did a thing that I have turned over in my mind a great many times since, and that I think tells more about why the Kingdom of Eldermoor was, under her, a good place to stand a watch than anything else I could set down. She did not offer me a reward. She did not offer me a promotion out of my post, or a medal to add to the ribbons, or any of the things a lesser sovereign offers, because they are the things a lesser sovereign understands. She crossed the small room to me, with her sleeping daughter still against her, and she put her free hand over mine, the one not holding the captured weapon, which a steward gently took from me at that moment, so that both the queen's gesture and the household's order could be served at once. And she held it, the way her husband had gripped my shoulder, and she said only, "Then I will not move you from your door. I think you have told me in your way that the door is where you wish to be, that you came here to be unneeded, and that being needed tonight cost you something, and that the kindest thing your queen can do is to give you back the quiet you came for, and trust that if the dark comes again, you will be there again." Her hand tightened on mine. "So that is what I will do. Stand your door, Corwin Vale. Grow old at it if the realm is kind. And know that one family in this kingdom understands exactly what stands there, and will understand it for the rest of our lives, and will teach our children to understand it." She looked down at the grave 10-year-old holding her hand. "Joran, this is the man we spoke of." Prince Joran looked up at me for a long moment, with the searching seriousness that children have when they are deciding something they will keep. Then he let go of his mother's hand, and he stood up very straight, the way he must have seen the guard stand 1,000 times, and he brought his small hand up in a careful, solemn salute. Not the salute of a child playing, but the salute of a boy who has decided in one night what kind of man he wants to grow into, and is telling the man in front of him so. I have stood at attention for kings and for coffins. I have held the line at state funerals and stood the silent watch through nights without number. I had never, in all of it, found anything as hard to stand still through as the salute of a 10-year-old prince in a small warm room in the small hours. And I will tell you that the ornament very nearly broke at last. That the iron stillness that 200 mocking guests could not crack came within a breath of cracking, before the grave courtesy of one child. I had carried up a forgotten stair without his ever knowing. I did not break, but I returned his salute slowly and fully, the way it is owed to a thing meant in earnest, and I held it, and the queen and the prince consort watched their son and the guard salute each other across the small room, and no one said anything, because there was nothing that needed saying. Then it was done, and the household took over, and I was at last allowed to go and be tired in private, though not in a cupboard. They gave me a proper room and a hot meal, and a physician I did not need, and I slept when I finally slept, the deep and dreamless sleep of a man who has spent everything he had and held the line with it. I was back at my post the following evening. I want to set that down plainly, because it is the truest ending I can give this, truer than the salute and the queen's hand and the humbling of the fool. The night after the worst night of my career, when the ceiling of the mirror gallery was being repaired, and the realm's quiet investigators were unwinding the long, patient plot that the man with the forgettable face had built, and finding, as such things always find, that he had been only a hired professional, that there were others behind him who would in time be reached, that the night had been the visible edge of a deeper thing the crown would spend a year running to ground. On that very next evening, I put on a fresh red tunic over a body that still ached in a dozen places, and I took up my rifle, properly pinned this time, and I went and stood my post at the door of the mirror gallery, immaculate and motionless, eyes forward, fixed on the corner of the gilded ceiling, where two new cherubs were already being painted over the wound in the old sky. Guests came and went. Most of them did not know what had happened in that gallery. The crown kept it quiet, as crowns do, and to the ordinary visitor I was again only the tall fellow in the doorway, the ornament, the handsome bit of furniture for the threshold. A woman remarked to her friend, passing, that she wondered whether the guard ever did anything but stand there. Her friend laughed, the bright practiced laugh I had heard 1,000 times, and said she supposed not, that they hired them for the shoulders and the silence. I did not turn my head. I did not let my eyes drop from the line I had fixed them on. I stood my post. And inside the long, quiet machinery of my stillness, where no guest could ever see it, I thought, stand and laugh then and be glad. Be glad that the man at the door is only furniture, that nothing has ever happened here worth the telling, that the worst trouble this gallery has ever seen is a guard who will not flinch. That is what the door is for. That is the whole of the work, to be so plainly safe that no one ever tries it, and when one night someone does, to be the one man ready, and then to come back the next evening and be furniture again, so that the laughing can go on. Let them think me an ornament. I know what the medals are for. And on the nights when the dark comes back to a bright room, and it always does, I will be at the door as I was that night, the one man standing where it is needed. That is not nothing. Whatever they call it, it is not nothing at all. It is the most that one still man can be.